On a freezing winter night in the mountains of Montana, a small child disappeared into the snow. No witnesses, no answers, just silence, cold, and questions that would remain unanswered for decades. That child survived, grew up, and left home to become a Navy SEAL, carrying a past he never fully understood. Years later, after war, loss, and coming home with only a loyal German shepherd by his side, he returned to the same forest where everything began. What he uncovered there was not what he expected, and it forced him to face the truth about who he was, where he came from, and what it really means to belong. Before we continue, take a moment and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you enjoyed deep, meaningful stories like this, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep these stories alive. The child left in the snow. Montana in late winter was not gentle with anyone who did not belong to it. The sky that night hung low and colorless, heavy with clouds that pressed snow down in thick, relentless sheets. Wind pushed through the pine forest like something alive, hissing through branches, bending tall trees until they groaned under the weight. The road that cut through the mountains had long since disappeared beneath ice and drifting white, leaving only darkness, cold, and the sound of the storm claiming everything it touched. It was on a night like this that a child was found. He was small, no more than 3 years old, curled beneath a fallen spruce at the edge of the forest, his body stiff with cold, his breaths shallow and uneven. The coat he wore was thin and torn at the sleeve, far too light for a Montana winter. Snow had settled into his hair, dark strands plastered to his forehead. His cheeks were pale, lips tinged blue. His fingers clenched as if even in sleep he was trying to hold on to warmth that had already left him. The boy did not cry. He no longer had the strength. A beam of light cut through the snowfall. It came from a flashlight, shaking slightly in a gloved hand, sweeping left to right, as if searching for something that logic said should not be there. The light stopped, moved back, froze. "Tom," a woman's voice called, tight with disbelief. I think there's a child." Sarah Carter stepped carefully off the narrow forest path, boots sinking into snow nearly up to her calves. She was a woman in her early 50s then, tall and slender, with narrow shoulders and a posture shaped by years of quiet endurance. Her dark brown hair, streaked with early gray, was pulled into a low braid beneath a wool hat. Snow clung to her lashes and the collar of her coat. Her face, long, pale and sharp at the cheekbones, tightened when she saw the boy. She dropped to her knees without hesitation. Her gloves brushed snow away from the child's face, revealing skin that felt frighteningly cold beneath her touch. His chest moved, barely. Sarah swallowed hard. She had worked as a nurse for years in a small mountain clinic. She knew the signs. Hypothermia. Severe. Dangerous. "Oh God," she whispered, her voice breaking despite herself. "Oh God, sweetheart." Behind her, Tom Carter stood frozen for half a second longer than he should have. Tom was a broad man, thick through the shoulders, his build shaped by decades of manual labor. His beard, once dark, now iron gray, was dusted white with snow. His face was deeply lined, carved by wind, sun, and a life that had never been easy. He was not a man who panicked easily. But something about the sight of that child, alone, silent, abandoned in the storm, hit him like a blow to the chest. He moved fast after that. Tom shrugged off his heavy coat and wrapped it around the boy with practiced efficiency, lifting him carefully, supporting his head and spine. The child weighed almost nothing. That terrified him more than anything else. "We're taking him home," Tom said. his voice firm, final. It was not a question. Sarah nodded, already on her feet, already thinking ahead. He's alive, barely. We need heat. Now. They did not speak again until they reached the truck. The drive back to their small cabin on the outskirts of town felt endless. Snow reduced visibility to almost nothing, and Tom drove with both hands locked on the wheel, jaw clenched, eyes scanning the road through the blur of white. Sarah sat in the passenger seat with the boy pressed to her chest, whispering softly, rubbing his arms, trying to coax warmth back into a body that had nearly given up. "Stay with me," she murmured over and over. "You're not alone. Stay." The boy's eyes fluttered open once. Just once. They were dark, too dark for a child so pale, wide with confusion and fear. His gaze unfocused, drifting past Sarah's face as if he did not quite understand what he was seeing. Then they closed again, and his body went limp. Sarah felt something inside her break. By the time they reached the cabin, Sarah was shaking, not from cold, but from adrenaline and something deeper, something older. Tom carried the child inside, kicking the door shut behind them as wind howled against the walls. The cabin was modest, built of rough timber, warmed by a wood stove that never quite rested through winter. Sarah moved automatically, stripping off the boy's wet clothes, wrapping him in blankets, checking his pulse, his breathing, his skin. "He's been out there a long time," she said quietly. "Longer than anyone should survive." Tom stood nearby, silent, his hands flexing at his sides. He had no medical training, no words that felt adequate. All he had was presence. They worked together through the night. Slowly, painfully, warmth returned. Color crept back into the boy's lips. His breathing steadied. He slept, deep and heavy, the sleep of exhaustion rather than danger. When morning came, the storm had passed. Sunlight spilled across untouched snow, blindingly white, as if the night before had never happened. The boy woke on the couch, wrapped in blankets, staring at the ceiling beams of a place he did not recognize. He did not scream. He did not cry. He simply watched, silent and alert, as Sarah approached with a cup of warm broth. "Hello," she said gently. "You're safe." He did not answer. They tried everything over the next days. Police reports, calls to nearby towns, notices at churches, gas stations, clinics. Sarah spoke to social services. Tom drove miles through snow-covered roads, asking questions no one could answer. No one was looking for the boy. No missing child reports, no frantic parents, no record of anyone matching his description. It was as if the forest had simply produced him and then fallen silent. The boy never spoke of his past. When asked where he came from, he shrugged. When asked his name, he shook his head. He clung to Sarah without realizing he was doing it, following her from room to room, watching her with eyes that never quite relaxed. At night he woke screaming, his small body rigid with terror, fists clenched as if fighting something unseen. Tom noticed something else. The boy watched doors. Always doors. He flinched at loud sounds. He ate quickly, as if afraid the food might disappear if he slowed down. These were not the habits of a child who had simply wandered off. Something had happened to him. Weeks passed. Winter deepened. And somewhere in the quiet space between obligation and choice, Sarah and Tom stopped asking what would happen next. One evening, as the boy sat on the floor stacking wooden blocks with intense concentration, Sarah looked at Tom and said, "We can't send him away." Tom didn't answer right away. He watched the child carefully, noting the way his small hands worked, deliberate and precise, the way his brow furrowed in focus. No, Tom said finally. We can't. They named him Daniel. It was Sarah's idea. Daniel, from the Bible. A man protected in the lion's den. A survivor. They hoped the name would be a prayer disguised as a word. Daniel grew slowly into the life they built around him. He was a quiet child, observant, stubborn in a way that did not seek attention but refused to be broken. He rarely cried. When he fell, he got back up without complaint. When he was afraid, he did not run. He froze, watched, learned. Tom taught him discipline without cruelty, how to split wood, how to listen before speaking, how to stand his ground without raising his voice. Sarah taught him kindness without weakness, how to care for others, how to endure pain without letting it harden him. They were not rich. The cabin was small. Winters were long. But Daniel was never hungry, never cold, never hit. And though no one could tell him where he had come from, one truth became clear as the years passed. The forest had not taken him. It had given him to the people who would raise him strong enough to survive what came next.
Daniel Carter left Montana on a gray morning in early spring, the kind where winter still lingered in the air even as the snow began to retreat. The mountains stood behind him, silent and unmoving, watching as they always had. He did not look back when the bus pulled away. He was 18 years old. Daniel had grown into a man with a quiet, contained presence. He stood just over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered but lean, his build shaped by years of physical labor and disciplined routines. His face was angular, with a strong jawline and cheekbones that caught the light sharply. He kept his dark hair short, almost severe. Not out of style, but practicality. By the time he enlisted, faint scars already marked his knuckles and forearms, evidence of work, not violence.
He rarely smiled, but when he did, it was restrained, private, as if emotion were something to be rationed carefully. Sarah cried when he told her he was joining the Navy. She stood in the kitchen, hands braced against the counter, her posture rigid as if holding herself together required effort. Her hair had gone fully gray by then, worn loose around her shoulders. Her face, still sharp and intelligent, carried the fine lines of years spent worrying quietly. She understood his decision, even as it terrified her. "You don't have to prove anything," she said softly. Daniel shook his head. "I know, but I need this." Tom said less. He simply nodded once, the way he did when something was settled. His beard had turned white, his hands permanently rough and cracked from cold and work.
He clasped Daniel's shoulder, firm and steady. "Finish what you start," Tom said, "and come home alive." Daniel promised both. Boot camp stripped away what little softness he had left. The instructors noticed him quickly, not because he was loud or aggressive, but because he did not break. When others panicked, Daniel slowed down. When exhaustion blurred judgment, he stayed precise. Pain did not surprise him. Fear did not overwhelm him. He treated both as conditions, not obstacles. Selection for BUD/S was brutal in ways that went beyond physical punishment. Cold water, sleep deprivation, endless drills designed to expose weakness. Daniel endured it all with a focus that unsettled even the instructors. During Hell Week, when a teammate collapsed during a run, Daniel hoisted the man onto his shoulder without a word and kept moving. No heroics, no announcement, just necessity. One instructor watched him for a long moment and muttered, "That one's been surviving his whole life." Daniel earned his trident. The years that followed blurred into deployments, training cycles, and missions that never made the news. Daniel became known within his unit as reliable to the point of predictability. He did not talk much. He followed orders precisely but was capable of decisive leadership when plans collapsed. He was the man others fell into step behind without realizing they were doing it. It was during his third deployment to the Middle East that Daniel met Rex.
Rex was a military working dog, a German shepherd nearing 4 years old when they were first assigned together. He was large even for his breed, with a powerful chest and long, muscular legs built for endurance. His coat was a mix of sable and black, thick and weather-resistant. His ears stood alert, rarely relaxed, and his amber-brown eyes missed nothing. Rex bore the scars of training and combat, a nicked ear, a faint line along his muzzle, but he carried himself with a controlled intensity that spoke of discipline rather than aggression. Rex's handler had been injured during an explosion. Temporary reassignment put Rex with Daniel's team. From the beginning, something between them worked. Daniel did not speak to Rex the way some soldiers did. No excessive commands, no emotional projection. He treated Rex like a teammate who understood context. Rex responded in kind, reading Daniel's posture and breathing as easily as voice commands. On their first mission together, Rex detected an IED buried beneath a dirt road minutes before the convoy passed. On another, he located a hidden combatant in a collapsed structure when thermal imaging failed. More than once, Rex's body moved before Daniel's mind caught up, dragging him backward from danger. During one night operation, gunfire erupted unexpectedly from a rooftop they had cleared moments earlier. Daniel went down hard, knocked off balance by debris. Rex launched himself between Daniel and the threat without hesitation, teeth bared, body a living barrier. The attacker fled. Daniel lay still for several seconds afterward, his heart hammering, one hand buried in Rex's thick fur. After that, Rex never left Daniel's side. The bond deepened over time, shaped by shared danger and long, silent nights. Rex slept lightly, always alert. Daniel learned the subtle changes in Rex's posture, the shift of weight, the tension in his shoulders, that signaled trouble before alarms ever did. When Daniel talked, Rex listened. Not with understanding of words, but with absolute presence. Daniel returned to the United States after 8 years of service. The war did not follow him home in visible ways, but it lived in the spaces between moments. He slept lightly. He mapped exits automatically. Crowds unsettled him. Silence did not. Rex was retired due to age and cumulative injuries around the same time. Military protocol allowed Daniel to adopt him. The paperwork was simple. The decision was not. Rex limped slightly on cold mornings now, favoring his left hind leg. His muzzle had begun to gray. But his eyes were the same. Sharp, steady, loyal. Daniel brought him home to Montana. Sarah laughed through tears when she met Rex, crouching carefully to let him sniff her hands. "He's beautiful," she said, brushing her fingers through his fur. Rex accepted the attention politely, then positioned himself between Sarah and Daniel without instruction. Tom observed the dog quietly, nodding once. "Good partner," he said. Daniel felt something settle inside him that night. Something that had been restless for years. For the first time since leaving home, he slept deeply. The road ahead was unclear. Civilian life felt unstructured, unfamiliar. His parents were older now. Time had taken its quiet toll. Daniel knew, even then, that this return was not an ending. It was only a pause. Montana welcomed Daniel back with a quiet that felt heavier than the silence he had known overseas. Spring had arrived late that year. Patches of snow still clung stubbornly to the shaded ground, and the mountains looked washed out under a pale sky. The road leading to the Carter cabin was familiar, every curve etched into Daniel's memory, yet something about it felt altered, as if the land itself knew what waited at the end. Rex sat upright in the passenger seat, his large frame steady despite the uneven gravel road. His muzzle had gone noticeably gray since Daniel had last seen the cabin, and his breathing was slower now, more deliberate. Still, his eyes tracked everything outside the window, alert and protective, as if returning home required vigilance. The cabin came into view, unchanged and yet not. The roof sagged slightly more than Daniel remembered. The fence leaned. The smoke from the chimney rose thin and uncertain, as though even the fire inside lacked conviction. Sarah was the first to appear at the door. She had grown smaller. That was the first thing Daniel noticed. Not shorter, but diminished. Her once straight posture now curved inward, her shoulders drawn slightly forward as if guarding a fragile core. Her hair, fully white now, was cut shorter than before, falling just below her jaw. Her skin had taken on a translucent quality, pale and fine, with blue veins visible beneath the surface. But her eyes, sharp, dark, intelligent, lit up when she saw him. "Danny," she said, her voice thinner but still warm.
Daniel crossed the distance in 3 strides and wrapped her carefully in his arms. She felt light, alarmingly so, like she might fracture if he held her too tightly. Rex pressed close, tail wagging once, restrained but unmistakably happy. Tom stood just behind her. Time had worked harder on him. His beard was fully white now, his face deeply lined, the angles of his jaw more pronounced. He had lost weight, and it showed in the way his clothes hung looser on his frame. But his eyes remained steady, the same calm, assessing gaze Daniel had grown up under. "You made it," Tom said, as if Daniel had returned from a long errand rather than a war. "I'm home," Daniel replied. The days that followed fell into a quiet rhythm.
Daniel took over the tasks Tom could no longer manage easily: chopping wood, repairing the fence, hauling water. Rex stayed close to Tom whenever Daniel wasn't nearby, lying at his feet, lifting his head at every sound. Sarah spent most mornings at the kitchen table, sorting pills into small containers, her hands trembling slightly as she worked. Illness had come slowly, the way it often does. Sarah's lungs had weakened over years of mountain winters and long clinic shifts. The diagnosis, pulmonary fibrosis, had come with no clear cause and no real solution. Tom's heart had begun to fail, not dramatically, but persistently, like a machine losing power one small piece at a time. They did not complain. That was the hardest part. Evenings were the worst.
When the sun dipped behind the mountains and shadows filled the cabin, the weight of unspoken things pressed in. Daniel cooked while Sarah watched from her chair, offering quiet suggestions. Tom listened to the radio, his eyes closed, Rex resting his head against Tom's knee. Sometimes Sarah spoke of small things, memories of Daniel as a child, the way he used to line his boots by the door with military precision long before he ever wore a uniform. The night he'd stayed up all night waiting for the first snowfall of the season. Daniel listened. He did not interrupt. One night, after a long silence, Tom spoke. "You ever wonder," he asked quietly, "where you came from?" Daniel's hands stilled on the dish he was drying. Rex's ears flicked. "I've wondered," Daniel said honestly, "but it never mattered." Tom nodded slowly. "It mattered to us. Not because we loved you less, because we didn't want you thinking the world forgot you. Sarah reached for Daniel's hand then, her fingers cool and light. We found you in that forest for a reason, she said. I still believe that. Her health declined quickly after that. There were hospital visits, oxygen tanks, nights when Daniel sat awake beside her bed, listening to her breathing, counting each rise and fall of her chest. Rex slept on the floor nearby, his body positioned so that he could see both Daniel and the door. On one of those nights, Sarah asked Daniel to bring her a small wooden box from the closet.
Inside were a few carefully preserved items: a child's coat, threadbare and faded, a small shirt with a torn seam, and a thin chain necklace with a dull oval pendant, its surface scratched nearly smooth. "These were on you," Sarah said softly, "the night we found you." Daniel turned the pendant over in his fingers. It was warm from the room, worn thin with time. "We asked everywhere," Sarah continued. "Town to town, church to church. No one claimed you. No one even knew to look." Tom's voice was steady, but there was something tight beneath it. "We stopped searching when it became clear no answers were coming. But we never stopped wondering." Sarah's eyes found Daniel's. "We don't want you alone after we're gone." Daniel shook his head immediately.
You're not... She smiled, faint but certain. "Danny, listen to me." She took a slow breath. "When the time comes, go back to the forest, the place where we found you. Not because answers are guaranteed, but because some journeys matter even if they don't end the way we hope." Tom nodded. "You deserve to know if someone out there once loved you enough to look." Sarah passed away quietly 2 weeks later, early in the morning, as pale sunlight crept across the cabin floor. Daniel held her hand. Rex lay pressed against the bed, unmoving. Tom followed her 3 months after that. His heart gave out while he slept in his chair by the window, the radio murmuring softly beside him. Rex found him first and did not bark. He simply sat, alert and still, until Daniel came. The funeral was small.
A handful of neighbors. A pastor who spoke gently of love chosen rather than inherited. Snow fell lightly, as if the mountain itself were offering a benediction. Afterward, Daniel stood alone in the cabin, the quiet louder than ever. He packed slowly. The old clothes, the pendant, a folded photograph of Sarah and Tom standing beside the truck years earlier, both smiling into the sun. He set everything carefully into a canvas bag. Rex watched him from the doorway, tail low, eyes attentive. That night, Daniel sat at the table long after the fire had burned down to embers. Tomorrow, he would return to the forest. Not as a lost child, but as a man ready to face whatever waited there. Winter had returned to the mountains as if it had never left. The forest Daniel remembered from childhood was harsher now, stripped bare by snow and wind. The trees stood tall and skeletal, their branches clawing at a sky the color of steel. Every step sank into deep snow with a hollow crunch that echoed through the stillness. Breath turned to mist instantly, hanging in the air before being torn apart by the cold. Daniel moved carefully, his pack heavy against his shoulders. The years in uniform had not softened him, but they had taught him how to endure. Still, this was different. This was not a mission with coordinates and extraction points. This was memory and instinct, unreliable things at best. Rex moved ahead of him. The German shepherd was older now, nearly 10, but the forest seemed to wake something ancient inside him. His gait was steady, confident, nose low to the ground, tail held level. Snow clung to the fur around his legs, but he paid it no mind. His ears twitched constantly, tracking sounds Daniel could not hear. "You remember this place better than I do," Daniel murmured. Rex did not look back, but his pace slowed, matching Daniel's. They reached the clearing by late afternoon. Daniel recognized it immediately, not because he remembered it clearly, but because something in his chest tightened as soon as he saw it. The trees opened just enough to let in pale light. Snow lay undisturbed except for animal tracks crossing the open ground. And there, half buried beneath drifts and fallen branches, stood the remains of a small wooden structure. The cabin had collapsed inward, its roof caved, walls bowed under years of neglect. It was no one's home anymore. Maybe it never had been. But Rex stopped abruptly at its edge, hackles lifting slightly. Daniel approached slowly. Inside the wreckage he found fragments, rusted nails, a broken lantern, scraps of cloth too decayed to identify. Nothing definitive, nothing that answered questions. But it was proof. Someone had once been here. That night, the storm came hard. Wind tore through the trees, driving snow sideways. Daniel set up a small shelter between two thick trunks, anchoring it with practiced efficiency. Rex curled close, his body pressed against Daniel's side, sharing warmth. Sleep came in broken pieces. Daniel dreamed of the desert, of gunfire echoing through empty streets, of running without knowing where he was going. He woke suddenly, heart racing, hand gripping nothing. Rex was already alert, standing, ears forward. The next morning, they pushed north toward the border towns. The small town of Pine Creek sat just miles south of Canada, a place that existed more out of habit than necessity. Weathered buildings lined a single main road, a gas station, a diner, a sheriff's office no bigger than a house. Daniel entered the county records building just before closing. Behind the counter sat Margaret Hensley, a woman in her late 60s with short silver hair and glasses perched low on her nose. She was compact, sturdy, with hands that bore the marks of decades spent handling paper and filing cabinets. Her eyes were sharp, curious, but not unkind. "Can I help you?" she asked. Daniel explained quietly. He showed her the pendant, the faded clothes. He did not ask for miracles. Margaret studied the items carefully, her expression shifting from polite interest to something heavier. "I remember something," she said slowly. "Not names, but a winter." She disappeared into the back room and returned with a thin folder. 15 years ago, she said, there was a couple, Thomas and Ellen Mercer. Lived outside town. Lost their boy during a blizzard.
Search teams went out for days. Never found him. Daniel's breath caught. They never recovered, Margaret continued. Ellen died 2 years later. Thomas left town not long after. Some folks said he couldn't stay where everything reminded him. She slid a copy of an old report across the counter. "It doesn't prove anything," she said gently. "But it's the closest thing we have." Outside, Daniel sat on the curb for a long time, Rex standing guard beside him. The trail to the Mercers' old property was nearly gone, reclaimed by forest and snow. Daniel followed it anyway, driven by something deeper than logic. Halfway up a narrow ridge, the ground gave way. Daniel felt it before he saw it. A sudden shift, a hollow sound beneath his boots. Ice cracked. Snow collapsed. He fell.
The world dropped out from under him, cold air tearing the breath from his lungs as he slid toward a dark crevice hidden beneath the snowpack. Rex lunged, his teeth clamped onto Daniel's jacket, his weight pulling backward with everything he had. Daniel slammed his elbow into the ice, pain shooting up his arm, fingers scrabbling for purchase. For one terrifying moment, Neither of them moved. Then Rex dug in, muscles straining, and Daniel rolled onto solid ground. They lay there, panting, foreheads nearly touching. "Good boy," Daniel whispered, his voice shaking. Rex whined softly and licked his face once. At the top of the ridge, they found what remained of the mercer's cabin. It was worse than the first. Only the stone foundation remained, blackened by fire long ago. The wind moved freely through the ruins. Daniel stood there as snow began to fall again. There were no answers waiting, no parents to embrace, no resolution wrapped neatly in truth. Only absence. But as Daniel turned away, he realized something else had taken shape. He had been loved once, enough for people to search, enough to leave marks on the world, however faint. That would have to be enough. For now. Spring reached the mountains slowly, as if unsure whether it was welcome. Snow receded in narrow bands along the forest floor, revealing dark earth and brittle grass beneath. The air softened, though cold still lingered in the shadows. Daniel stood at the edge of a small cemetery outside Pine Creek, his breath steady, his posture still. Rex sat beside him, calm and alert, his aging body relaxed but ready. The grave markers were simple. 2 weathered stones stood side by side, their inscriptions worn by time and snow. Thomas Mercer, Ellen Mercer. No dates of birth carved deep enough to read clearly. Only the years of death remained legible, etched shallow but certain. Daniel knelt. He placed the pendant between the stones, its dull metal catching a brief shard of sunlight.
For a long moment, he said nothing. He had learned in war that silence often carried more truth than words. "They looked for me," he finally said, his voice low. "That matters." Rex lowered his head slightly, ears angled forward as if listening. Margaret Hensley had told him the rest a week earlier. They had returned to the forest again and again after the storm, long after hope should have faded. Thomas Mercer had organized searches himself, refusing to believe his son was gone. Years later, the accident, an icy mountain road, a single moment of loss of control. No survivors. Daniel absorbed the facts without drama. Pain, he had learned, did not need embellishment to be real. Standing there now, he felt something unfamiliar settle into place. Not joy, not relief, but grounding. He was not a man who had come from nothing. He stood, brushed snow from his knees, and turned away from the graves without regret. The decision to stay came quietly. Pine Creek was small, but it breathed. The diner opened every morning at 5. Children rode bikes along cracked sidewalks once the snow cleared. The sheriff waved when Daniel passed, offering nods instead of questions. Daniel rented an old maintenance building on the edge of town, a long, low structure with warped siding and a gravel yard behind it. It had once housed road equipment. Now it smelled of oil, dust, and possibility. Rex took to the place immediately. Despite his age, the German Shepherd moved with purpose through the open space, inspecting corners, sniffing equipment, tail held level. His coat had thinned slightly along the hips, gray spreading across his muzzle, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. Daniel named the place North Ridge Canine and Recovery. The first person to walk through the door was Evan Brooks, a former Army medic in his early 30s. Evan was tall and narrow, with a perpetually tired expression and hands that shook faintly when he thought no one was watching. His hair was light brown, cut unevenly as if he did it himself, and his skin bore the sallow tone of someone who slept poorly. "I heard you work with dogs," Evan said, avoiding eye contact. "And soldiers." Daniel nodded once. We start slow. Evan did not smile, but he came back the next day. Word spread. A firefighter with a limp from a collapsed roof.
A Marine who hadn't slept through the night in years. A teenage boy from a nearby reservation who flinched at raised voices and trusted dogs more than people. Daniel did not advertise himself as a healer. He offered structure, routine, work that required attention without demanding explanation. Rex became the heart of it. He trained younger dogs, rescues, former working dogs, animals with histories written into their posture and scars. He corrected gently, firmly, never with cruelty. When someone froze, overwhelmed by memory, Rex sat with them, steady and present, grounding them in the moment. Children were drawn to him instinctively. One afternoon, a group arrived from a regional foster program. 5 kids, bundled in jackets too thin for the mountain air.
They watched from a distance as Rex moved through training drills. A small girl with dark braids stepped forward. She could not have been more than 7. "Is he scary?" she asked. Rex sat on command, ears relaxed, tail thumping once. "No," Daniel said. "He's brave." She approached slowly and placed her hand on Rex's head. Rex leaned into the touch. Laughter followed, hesitant at first, then full. By summer, the center had taken shape. The yard filled with movement. Dogs running controlled drills. Veterans working side by side, speaking little, understanding much. Children helping with feeding schedules, learning responsibility and trust. Daniel watched it all from the edge, never placing himself at the center. That was Rex's role. On the first anniversary of the center's opening, Daniel returned to the cemetery. He brought flowers this time, simple ones. He stood quietly, Rex at his side, and spoke of what had grown from loss. He did not ask for approval. He did not need it. As they walked back toward the truck, Daniel felt something he had not felt in years, a future that did not require escape. Behind him, life continued. A child laughed. A dog barked. The mountains stood patient and unmoving, exactly as they always had. Daniel Carter went home. Carter went.
Sometimes, the miracle is not that everything turns out the way we hoped. Sometimes, the miracle is that we are still standing after everything that tried to break us. Daniel never found his parents alive, and he never received the reunion he might have prayed for as a child lost in the snow. But what he did find was something just as holy, the truth that he was never abandoned. Long before Daniel could understand it, God was already at work. He was present in the timing of a storm, in the hands of 2 strangers who chose love and became parents, in the loyalty of a dog who never left his side, and in a quiet town that gave him a place to belong. What looked like loss was, in truth, preparation.
Many of us spend our lives asking, "Why did this happen to me?" But this story gently invites us to ask a different question. What is God building through this? Because God does not always remove the pain, but He never wastes it. Every tear, every waiting season, every unanswered prayer can still be part of a greater design. If you are watching this today and you feel alone, if you feel like life has taken more than it has given, if you are still searching for answers that may never fully come, please remember this. God sees you. God remembers you. And God is not finished with your story yet. What you lost does not define you. What you survived does.
Sometimes, the family we are meant to have is not the one we are born into, but the one we are called to build. Through kindness, through service, and through faith. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment below. Your words might become the miracle someone else is praying for. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel so we can continue sharing stories that remind us we are never alone. May God bless you and keep you. May He bring peace to your heart and light to your path. And may you always remember, even in the coldest season of your life, you are held in His hands. Amen.